I never thought family reunions could be battlegrounds until that summer evening. The champagne glasses clinked around me as my father's tech company celebrated its 20th anniversary. As the newly appointed CFO at 32, I should have been floating on cloud nine. Instead, I was frozen in the corner of our penthouse venue, my phone screen illuminating a devastating truth. "You need to see this," read the text from Marcus, my head of security. Attached was a recording from yesterday's board meeting, one I'd missed due to a client emergency. In it, my cousin Ryan, who held a minor position in marketing, was speaking with my father. Alex is smart, Uncle Robert, but inexperienced with the big leagues. The Johnson merger needs someone who can navigate both the tech and the personal aspects. Ryan's voice was smooth as silk. "Which is why I wanted to share some good news. Melissa and I are getting engaged next month." Melissa Johnson, heiress to Johnson Tech, our biggest competitor and potential merger partner. My father's response sent ice through my veins. "This changes everything. With you as part of the Johnson family, maybe we should reconsider the succession planning." After all, blood combined with business, nothing could be stronger. I set my champagne down as Ryan approached, his perfect white smile gleaming under the chandeliers. "Alex, just the cousin I wanted to see." He pulled me into a bear hug, whispering, "Don't worry about the Johnson deal. I'll make sure you get a nice position in the new structure." That's when I knew. This wasn't just about business. This was betrayal wrapped in a family embrace. The Anderson Tech story was Silicon Valley legend. My father started it in our garage when I was just 12, and I grew up watching him build it from nothing while my mother battled cancer. When Mom died, the company became our shared grief therapy. For me, it was never about the money, it was my mother's legacy too. Ryan, my cousin, came into our lives after his parents divorced. My father, ever the compassionate brother-in-law, gave him a job in marketing where he excelled at schmoozing clients but contributed little to actual innovation. 3 months ago, my father announced his retirement and named me as his successor. "You've earned this," he told me privately. "This company runs in your blood." He transferred 30% of his controlling shares to me, with the promise of the remaining 21% upon the successful Johnson merger, a deal I'd spent 2 years carefully orchestrating. Ryan's congratulations seemed genuine then. Now I understood the calculation behind his words. While I'd been negotiating tech specifications with Johnson Tech, Ryan had been pursuing Melissa Johnson. Their whirlwind romance wasn't romance at all, it was his Trojan horse into both family businesses. As I watched him work the room at the anniversary party, stopping to chat with board members while Melissa clung to his arm, the bitter truth settled in my stomach like lead. The company I'd helped build since childhood was being stolen right from under me with my father's blessing. And the worst part? Everyone thought it was a perfect business fairy tale. Over the next weeks, the betrayal deepened with each passing day. My access to key accounts became mysteriously restricted. Meetings I'd always been invited to now happened without my knowledge. My strategic proposals were being reconsidered in light of the upcoming merger. The breaking point came during the quarterly investors meeting. I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation on our expansion into renewable tech solutions, my pet project for the past year. As I set up my slides, my father cleared his throat. "Before Alex begins, I'd like to make an exciting announcement," he said, beaming with pride that once would have warmed my heart. Given Ryan's unique position with the Johnson family and his outstanding contributions to our marketing strategy, the board has decided to create a new position of Chief Strategy Officer, overseeing all merger activities and the renewable tech initiative. The room erupted in applause as Ryan stood, his arm around Melissa. I felt every eye turn to gauge my reaction. With a professionalism that cost me my soul, I forced a smile and congratulated him. "Actually," Ryan said, his voice dripping with false humility, "I've reviewed Alex's renewable proposal and think we should take it in a different direction. The Johnsons have concerns about the timeline and cost allocations." He proceeded to dismantle my year's work in 5 minutes, replacing it with a watered-down version that would essentially sell our innovative technology to Johnson Tech for pennies on the dollar. When I tried to object, my father silenced me with a look. Later that evening, I found my personal items moved to a smaller office down the hall. My nameplate had already been replaced with Associate CFO. When I confronted my father, his response shattered the last of my illusions. This merger is everything, Alex. Ryan's relationship with Melissa is our golden ticket. Sometimes we have to make personal sacrifices for the greater good of the company. So my years of work, my ideas, my leadership, none of that matters? My voice cracked despite my best efforts. He sighed, suddenly looking old. Business is business, and sometimes blood isn't enough. I walked out of his office understanding that in his eyes, I was the wrong kind of blood after all. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by family photos and company awards, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Everything I'd worked for was slipping away. But something inside me, maybe my mother's fighting spirit, refused to surrender without a fight. By morning, I had a plan. First, I called Marcus, head of security and one of the few people I still trusted. I need everything you can find on Ryan's relationship with Melissa Johnson. When it started, any correspondence, meetings, everything. Next, I reached out to Diane Zhang, our brilliant legal counsel who'd been mysteriously sidelined around the same time Ryan's star began to rise. She agreed to meet me for coffee, away from the office. "I've been watching this unfold," Diane said, her eyes sharp with intelligence. "Your father is making a catastrophic mistake. The Johnson merger looks good on paper, but I've reviewed their financials in depth. They're over-leveraged and using this merger to access your clean balance sheet." "And Ryan knows this?" I asked, stunned. "Ryan knows only what benefits Ryan. But there's something else." She lowered her voice. "The share transfer your father promised you, sources in legal say those shares are being restructured as a wedding gift to Ryan and Melissa instead." I felt the floor drop from beneath me. Not only was I losing my position, but my ownership stake as well. That afternoon, I did something I'd never imagined doing. I contacted James Wheeler, my father's oldest rival and the founder of Wheeler Innovations. For years, he'd tried to partner with us, seeing the potential in our combined technologies. "I need an ally," I told him simply. "And I have information about the Johnson-Anderson merger that will interest you greatly." As I hung up, my office door opened. Ryan stood there, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "The board is concerned about your commitment to the merger, Alex. Uncle Robert asked me to make sure you're still a team player." The casual slip of "Dad" told me everything I needed to know about how he saw the future. I forced myself to smile, just focusing on the financial details. "That's my job, after all." "Good," he nodded. "Because we're accelerating the timeline. The announcement of my engagement to Melissa and the merger will happen simultaneously next week." As he left, I whispered to myself, "Game on." That night, unable to sleep, I found myself driving to my childhood home. My father still lived there, though the modest suburban house seemed incongruous with his current wealth and status. Using my key, I let myself in and walked straight to the garage, the birthplace of Anderson Tech. It remained largely unchanged, my father's sentimental museum. Old computers, whiteboards still marked with faded code, and in the corner, my mother's desk where she'd handled the books in those early days. I ran my fingers over her calculator, remembering how she'd taught me to balance the accounts while battling stage 4 cancer. "We're building something that will outlast both of us," she told me one night when the pain kept her awake. "Promise me you'll see it through, Alex." I'd promised. I was 15 when she died, and the next day, I was back in this garage, coding through my grief. My father and I rarely spoke about our feelings, but we built this company together, word by word, line by line, contract by contract. The betrayal cut deeper because of these memories. Ryan hadn't been there during the years of ramen dinners and maxed out credit cards. He hadn't held my mother's hand during chemo or helped my father pitch to indifferent investors. He showed up when the hard work was done, when success was already blooming. I opened an old filing cabinet and found it the original business plan in my mother's handwriting. Anderson Family Technologies was the original name. Family. The word mocked me now. Behind the document was a photo I'd forgotten my 16th birthday. No party, just my father and me celebrating our first major contract with cupcakes in this very garage. My eyes were red from crying, but I was smiling. Dad had his arm around me, looking at me with such pride. What had changed? When had I become dispensable to him? Or had I always misunderstood my place? As dawn broke, I made another discovery, a sealed envelope with my name on it in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just days before her death and a small flash drive. My dearest Alex, it read. If you're reading this, you've found yourself at a crossroads with the company. Your father is brilliant, but flawed. On this drive is my gift to you, ownership documents for my original patents that formed the core of Anderson Tech. These belong to you, not the company. Remember that your worth isn't tied to your father's approval. Build something worthy of your own vision. All my love, Mom. I clutched the letter, tears streaming down my face. All these years, she'd somehow known this day might come. She'd prepared me for it. And in that moment of deepest hurt, she'd given me the first piece of my salvation. The following evening, I met James Wheeler at his estate overlooking the Pacific. At 70, he was still sharp as a tack, his eyes missing nothing as he assessed me. You look like hell, Alex, he said, bypassing pleasantries. And considering you're here betraying your father's confidence, I assume there's a good reason. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? Then I remembered my mother's letter, and my resolve hardened. The Johnson-Anderson merger is a mistake, I began. Johnson Tech is financially unstable, and they're using my cousin's relationship with Melissa Johnson to orchestrate a takeover that will ultimately devalue both companies. Wheeler didn't seem surprised. I've suspected as much about Johnson's finances. What I don't understand is why Robert can't see it. He's blinded by the prospect of a family dynasty. Ryan has convinced him that his marriage to Melissa creates the perfect corporate union. Wheeler studied me over his whiskey glass. And what exactly do you want from me, Alex? Revenge? The question hit me like a bucket of cold water. Was that what this was? Simple revenge? No, I said finally. I want to save what my mother and father built. I want to honor the innovation that made Anderson Tech special. And yes, I want what was promised to me, but not out of greed. Wheeler set down his glass. Your mother was the moral compass of your father's enterprise, you know. Brilliant woman. He turned back to me. Here's what we'll do. Wheeler Innovations can become a silent partner to you personally. I'll purchase the shares your father promised you, not from the company, but as an investment in you. Why would you do this? Because unlike your father, I recognize potential when I see it. And because your mother once did me a great kindness that I've never been able to repay. His eyes softened momentarily. Consider this my belated thank you. Even with those shares, I'd be a minority stakeholder, I pointed out. True. But combined with your mother's original patents. He smiled at my shock. Oh yes, I know about those. Catherine made sure those remained her personal intellectual property. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. So you'll help me? I'll do better than that, Wheeler said. I'll teach you how to win. Your father and cousin see business as a family affair. You need to see it as the war it truly is. A week later, everything was in place. Wheeler's attorneys had created the holding company, and I'd secured my mother's patents. All I needed now was confirmation about Ryan's true motivations, the final piece that would justify my countermoves. Marcus came through beautifully. He arrived at my apartment with a flash drive and a grim expression. You were right to be suspicious, he said. But it's worse than you thought. The evidence was damning. Emails between Ryan and Melissa dating back 18 months long before the merger talks were officially on the table. Their relationship wasn't a coincidence, it was a calculated strategy. But the true bombshell came in the form of a recorded conversation between Ryan and Melissa from just 2 weeks ago. Once we control both companies, we'll strip Anderson Tech for its assets and intellectual property, Ryan's voice said clearly. Your father gets the technology he's wanted for years. I get controlling interest in the restructured entity, and your family gets to write off that debt you've been hiding from the shareholders. Melissa's laugh was cold. And what about Alex? Alex is brilliant with tech, but naive about people. The shares Uncle Robert promised will conveniently get delayed until after our marriage, by which point the new board structure will make them practically worthless. And your uncle is okay with this? Melissa sounded doubtful. Ryan's response chilled me. Uncle Robert is dying, Mel. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. He's kept it quiet, but he's got 6 months, maybe less. He just wants to see the company's future secured before he goes. He trusts me because I'm telling him exactly what he wants to hear, that I'll take care of the Anderson legacy. I sat in stunned silence as the recording ended. My father was dying? He hadn't told me, but he'd told Ryan. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible. There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly. I found this while accessing Ryan's cloud storage. He pulled up a document titled Restructuring Plan, dated for 1 week after the proposed merger. It was a termination list. My name was at the top, followed by everyone who'd ever shown loyalty to me within the company. They weren't just pushing me aside, they were planning to erase every trace of my contribution. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. Does my father know about this part of the plan? Marcus shook his head. Based on the communications I've seen, Ryan has been very careful about what he shares with your father. I think he's exploiting Robert's illness and playing on his fears about the company's future. After he left, I called Wheeler. I have what we need, I told him. And we need to move faster. My father is dying. That changes things, he said finally. Are you prepared for what comes next? Once we make our move, there's no going back. I'm ready, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's time to take back what's mine. The morning of the big announcement arrived the day Ryan and Melissa would publicly announce both their engagement and the merger. Business channels were buzzing with speculation about the perfect corporate union. Ryan had been making the rounds on financial news shows, positioning himself as the visionary behind Anderson Tech's evolution. But I was ready. The past week had transformed me. Gone was the trusting cousin who believed in family loyalty above all. In his place stood someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes you had to break things to fix them. I'd made one last attempt to reach my father the previous evening, going to his home uninvited. I found him gaunt and gray, the cancer clearly taking its toll, though he tried to hide it. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? I'd asked, my anger momentarily forgotten in the face of his mortality. He'd looked away. I didn't want your pity. I needed to know the company would be secure. With Ryan? The person who's known you for a fraction of the time I have? Who wasn't there for the struggles? Ryan understands alliance building, he'd said wearily. He's bringing us the Johnson connection. What can you offer that compares to that? The truth, I'd replied simply, showing him the evidence of Ryan and Melissa's real plan. He'd refused to look. Now, as the conference room filled with board members, press, and the Johnson family, I sat quietly in the back. Ryan stood at the front beside my father and the Johnsons, beaming with triumph. He caught my eye and had the audacity to wink. My father called the meeting to order, his voice weaker than most would notice. Today marks a historic moment for Anderson Tech, he began. The joining of 2 families and 2 companies into a stronger whole. As he spoke about vision and future, I sent a text to Wheeler. Now, right on cue, the conference room doors opened. James Wheeler himself walked in, followed by his legal team. A murmur ran through the crowd. Sorry to interrupt, Robert, Wheeler said pleasantly. But I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who's merging with whom today. My father's face darkened. What is the meaning of this, James? Wheeler smiled. I'm here representing a major shareholder in Anderson Tech. One who holds significant interests that impact any potential merger. That's impossible, Ryan interjected. We know all the shareholders. Do you? I stood, walking to the front of the room. Because as of last week, Wheeler Innovations holds the shares that were promised to me. And more importantly, I paused, making eye contact with my father. I control my mother's original patents, the foundation of this company's technology. The room erupted in confused chatter. Melissa Johnson whispered urgently to her father, whose face had gone pale. My father gripped the podium, looking stricken. Alex, what have you done? He whispered. What you taught me to do, I replied softly. Protect what matters. Wheeler's lead attorney stepped forward, distributing documents to the board members. As you'll see, any merger requires approval from the patent holder. Additionally, the shares transferred to our holding company give us effective blocking power for any major restructuring. Ryan lunged toward me, his perfect facade cracking. You little snake. After everything your father has done for you. Careful, Ryan. I cut him off. The press might wonder why you're so upset about proper corporate governance. The next hour was chaos, but the kind I'd meticulously planned for. The Johnson merger was effectively dead. Melissa and her father left in a fury of threatened lawsuits that everyone knew would go nowhere. The next board meeting was called for the following week. In the days between, news of the failed Johnson merger and the new Wheeler partnership sent our stock soaring. Industry analysts praised the move as strategically brilliant, citing the complementary technologies and solid financial foundation. Ryan, predictably, didn't go quietly. He launched a whisper campaign, telling anyone who would listen that I'd betrayed the family, manipulated a sick man, sold out to the competition. He tried to rally board members to his side, promising them special considerations once he sorted out this temporary setback. What he didn't know was that Marcus had been monitoring his communications. Every desperate promise, every manipulation was documented and forwarded to the appropriate parties. By the time the board meeting arrived, Ryan's credibility was in tatters. I arrived early to find my father already there, looking better than he had in weeks. Treatment had begun, and while the prognosis remained guarded, he seemed to have found new determination. I've been reviewing the Wheeler proposal in detail, he said without preamble. It's good. Better than the Johnson option would have been. Coming from him, this was monumental. Thank you, I said simply. I should have seen what Ryan was doing, he continued. I let my desire for a simple succession blind me. And I hurt you in the process. Before I could respond, the door opened and Ryan stormed in, face flushed with anger. When he saw us together, he faltered momentarily before regaining his composure. Well, isn't this cozy? The prodigal daughter returns and all is forgiven. His voice dripped sarcasm. My father straightened. Ryan, I think it's best if you don't attend this meeting. Excuse me? I'm CISO of this company. You can't just. Actually, I interrupted. As of this morning, that position has been eliminated. The board voted via email. Unanimous decision. Ryan's face contorted with rage. This is because I wouldn't marry into the right family? Because I couldn't deliver Melissa Johnson on a silver platter like you wanted. My father looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Ryan and Melissa discussing their plan to strip the company assets and push me out. As the damning evidence filled the room, Ryan's face went from red to white. My father listened in stunned silence, his expression hardening with each revealed betrayal. When it ended, the room was deathly quiet. Finally, my father spoke, his voice ice cold. You were using my illness as leverage? planning to dismantle everything I've built once I was gone. Ryan backpedaled desperately. Uncle Robert, you can't believe this. Alex is manipulating you. She's edited these recordings, That's enough. My father stood, impressively commanding despite his weakened state. You're fired, Ryan. And I want your resignation from the board on my desk within the hour. You can't do this. I'm family. So is Alex, my father said quietly. The difference is, she fought to protect what we built, not to carve it up for parts. As security arrived to escort a still protesting Ryan from the building, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for what could have been. 6 months later, I stood at the podium during the official launch of the Wheeler Anderson Technology Group. The auditorium was packed with employees, investors, and media. My father sat in the front row, thinner but prouder, responding well to his treatments and determined to see our new venture flourish. When my mother and father started this company in our garage 20 years ago, they weren't just building a business, I began. They were creating a legacy of innovation, integrity, and perseverance. I spoke about our new direction, the exciting technologies we were developing, and the Katherine Anderson Foundation's first 10 grant recipients, brilliant young minds with ambitious ideas and challenging personal circumstances. In business, as in life, we sometimes face betrayal and disappointment. We discover that those we trusted have different agendas, different values. When that happens, we have a choice to retreat into bitterness or to rebuild with greater wisdom. In the months since Ryan's departure, we discovered additional evidence of his planned corporate raid. The Johnsons' financial troubles had been even worse than suspected, and our technology had been their planned lifeline. The true measure of success isn't in avoiding falls, but in how we rise afterward. It's in recognizing that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as our worst setbacks. After the presentation, during the reception, I found my father standing alone by the window, looking out at the city. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked, joining him. He smiled faintly. "I was thinking about second chances. I nearly destroyed everything your mother and I built because I couldn't see past my own fears. We all make mistakes." "Yes, but not all of us are fortunate enough to have someone fight to correct them." He turned to face me. "Thank you for not giving up on the company. Or on me." I thought about the past year, the betrayal, the pain, the rebuilding. Mom's letter said you feared abandonment above all else. She was right about that. But she was also right that I needed to find my own path, even if that meant opposing you. Katherine always did see things clearer than I could. He chuckled softly. She'd be amused to know that Wheeler, of all people, ended up being our white knight. I think she knew we'd need allies outside the family circle someday. As the evening ended and guests departed, I found myself back at the podium in the empty auditorium, thinking about the journey. From the devastated CFO at a champagne reception to the CEO of a stronger, more ethical company. From betrayed cousin to resilient leader. Sometimes the greatest betrayals lead us to our truest allies. Sometimes losing what we thought was rightfully ours forces us to create something even more valuable. My cousin tried to take my business shares through marriage, but I'd already found a better partner, someone who valued contribution over connection, innovation over inheritance. In protecting my legacy, I discovered a truth worth more than any business valuation. Family isn't who you're related to, it's who stands beside you when the hardest choices must be made.